The Untold Secrets of Alexander the Great. Over 2,000 years ago, a young prince from Macedonia dreamed of conquering the world. His name was Alexander the Great. He was not just a warrior, he was a leader, a thinker, and a dreamer. By the age of 20, he became king. By 30, he ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen. But how did he do it? What made him different? In this book, you will uncover his secrets, his strategies, his battles, and his vision. Was he a hero or a tyrant? Let's step into his world and discover the untold story of Alexander the Great. Chapter 1. The Making of a Conqueror. Early life and influences. Alexander the Great was not just a warrior. He was born to be one. From the very beginning, his life was surrounded by power, mystery, and destiny. His father, King Philip II of Macedonia, was a brilliant leader who turned his small kingdom into a powerful force. His mother, Queen Olympias, was a strong and determined woman who made sure her son believed he was special. Even before he was born, prophecies spoke of his greatness. Before Philip became king, Macedonia was weak. Bigger and stronger nations like Athens and Persia ignored it. But Philip had a dream: to make Macedonia the most powerful kingdom in the world. He trained his soldiers to fight in a new way, creating the Macedonian phalanx, where warriors stood in rows, holding long spears. No enemy could break through this wall of fighters. With this powerful army, Philip conquered Greece, uniting all the Greek cities under his rule. But Philip's dream did not stop there. He wanted to defeat the Persian Empire, the richest and strongest empire at that time. Before he could begin this great war, something terrible happened. He was assassinated. His death left Macedonia in danger. But his son, Alexander, would finish what he started. Alexander's mother, Queen Olympias, was unlike any woman of her time. She was passionate, strong, and filled with ambition. Some people believed she practiced magic and could talk to gods. She told Alexander that he was not an ordinary boy. She said he was not just the son of Philip, but also the son of Zeus, the king of the gods. She wanted him to believe that he was born to rule the world. She also filled his mind with the stories of Achilles, the great warrior from Greek myths. She told Alexander that he was a descendant of Achilles, and he should live like a hero, brave, fearless, and unstoppable. Even before Alexander was born, people believed he was special. One night, Olympias had a strange dream. She dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, and flames spread everywhere. A priest told her that this man would be powerful and rule many lands. On the day Alexander was born, something even stranger happened. That same night, Philip won a great battle, and a famous temple in Greece burned to the ground. People believed this was a sign that the gods had sent a new ruler into the world. Philip wanted Alexander to be more than just a warrior. He wanted him to be wise. So he hired Aristotle, the greatest teacher in Greece, to educate his son. Aristotle taught Alexander about philosophy, science, and war strategy. He taught him about different lands, cultures, and how to rule wisely. Most importantly, he taught Alexander how to think like a leader. Alexander grew up believing that he was born to be a hero. He admired warriors like Achilles and Hercules, reading their stories and dreaming of becoming like them. From Achilles, he learned that a warrior should never be afraid. From Hercules, he learned that a leader must always push forward, no matter how hard the challenge. Alexander didn't just learn about war, he fought in one. At 16 years old, he led an army for the first time and won his first battle. Philip was so proud that he let Alexander command part of his army. The young prince proved that he was not just his father's son, he was a warrior in his own right. When Alexander was 20 years old, his world changed forever. His father was murdered, stabbed during a celebration. No one knew exactly who planned it, but some whispered that Olympias had a hand in it. With Philip gone, Macedonia was in danger. Rivals wanted the throne, and enemies wanted to attack. But Alexander acted fast. As soon as Philip died, Alexander's enemies thought they could take Macedonia. They were wrong. In just a few months, Alexander crushed every threat. He defeated rebels, punished traitors, and showed no mercy. His message was clear. He was king now. and no one could challenge him. Most kings would have been happy ruling Greece, but not Alexander. His father's dream lived inside him. He wanted to do more than just rule Macedonia. He wanted to conquer Persia and beyond. At just 20 years old, he stood before his army and declared, "My father left me a kingdom, but I will leave you an empire." With his kingdom secure, Alexander the Great was ready to begin his journey toward world conquest. Chapter 2. Unstoppable on the battlefield. Military genius and strategy. Alexander the Great was more than just a king. He was a warrior like no other. He never lost a battle in his entire life, facing enemies that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped. But they made one mistake. They underestimated him. Alexander had a way of thinking that no other general had. He did not just fight with his sword. He fought with his mind. He studied his enemies, understood their weaknesses, and struck when they least expected it. One of his greatest weapons was the Macedonian phalanx. This deadly formation was created by his father, Philip II, but Alexander made it even stronger. Soldiers stood in tight rows, holding spears so long that no enemy could get close. When the phalanx moved forward, it was like an unstoppable wall of blades, cutting through enemy lines. Other armies had never seen anything like it. They would charge at Alexander, thinking they could break his forces, only to be stopped and slaughtered. But a strong army was not enough. Alexander knew that speed was just as important as strength. He used a tactic that modern generals would later call blitz warfare. His soldiers moved fast, attacking before the enemy had time to prepare. Most armies took weeks to set up battles, but Alexander struck suddenly, surprising them. His cavalry, made up of his most trusted fighters, would ride straight into enemy lines, breaking their formations. By the time the enemy understood what was happening, it was already too late. Another secret to his success was psychological warfare. Alexander did not just fight battles. He controlled the minds of his enemies. He spread rumors, used spies, and even let prisoners escape just so they could tell terrifying stories about his army. Before he even arrived, some cities surrendered out of fear. He also treated defeated soldiers with kindness, making them respect him rather than hate him. This made it easier for him to rule conquered lands without rebellion. His strategies were put to the test in his first great battle, the Battle of Granicus. The Persian army was waiting for him across a river, thinking he would never attack head-on. But Alexander did the impossible. With his army still soaking wet from crossing the river, he charged straight at the Persians. His enemies panicked. They thought no sane general would attack in such a risky situation. But Alexander was fearless, cutting through their ranks and leading his army to victory. This was only the beginning. The Battle of Issus was even greater. Here, Alexander faced King Darius III, the ruler of the mighty Persian Empire. Darius had a massive army, much larger than Alexander's. Any other general would have retreated. Not Alexander. Instead, he tricked Darius into thinking he would attack from one side, but suddenly struck from another. His soldiers moved like lightning, breaking through Persian lines. At the height of the battle, Alexander saw Darius and charged straight at him. The great king of Persia panicked and ran away. His army saw him fleeing and lost hope, leading to a crushing defeat. Then came the siege of Tyre, a city built on an island, surrounded by high walls and strong defenses. No army had ever conquered Tyre before. The city thought it was safe from Alexander. But he refused to give up. He ordered his men to build a giant bridge from the mainland to the island, inch by inch. It took months, but Alexander never lost patience. When the bridge was finished, his army stormed the city, taking it by force. Tyre, once thought to be untouchable, was now his. But Alexander was not done. His dream was not just to defeat Persia. It was to take over the entire empire. He marched deeper into enemy lands, conquering great cities like Babylon and Susa, which were filled with gold, treasures, and luxury beyond imagination. He did not burn these cities down. Instead, he took control, making sure the people accepted him as their ruler. The final test came at Gaugamela, where Darius gathered his largest army yet. The Persian king had war elephants, thousands of archers, and a battlefield prepared to trap Alexander. But Alexander was ready. He tricked Darius into stretching his forces too wide, creating a gap in the middle. Then, like a thunderbolt, he struck at that weak point, cutting the Persian army in half. Darius, once again, ran for his life. With that, the Persian Empire was no more. Alexander had done what no one thought was possible. He had defeated the greatest empire of his time. But he was not finished. His eyes were already set on new lands, new battles, and new challenges. His hunger for conquest was unstoppable. And so, with his army behind him, Alexander the Great marched forward, ready to make history once again. Chapter 3. The Empire Builder. Ruling over a multicultural world. Alexander the Great was not only a warrior but also a ruler who knew how to govern a vast empire. After defeating the Persian Empire, he did not stop. He continued expanding his rule, making himself king of many different lands. Unlike other conquerors, he did not simply destroy cities and force people to obey him. Instead, he wanted to unite the world under one great empire. When Alexander arrived in Egypt, he was not met with resistance. The Egyptians had been ruled by the Persians, and they were unhappy with their foreign rulers. But Alexander was different. He treated the Egyptians with respect, honoring their gods and traditions. They saw him as a liberator, not an invader. In fact, they welcomed him as a god. The priests of Egypt even crowned him as Pharaoh, the highest ruler of their land. This made Alexander even more powerful, as now he was not just a king, he was seen as a divine ruler. One of the most important things he did in Egypt was founding the city of Alexandria. He wanted it to be the greatest city in the ancient world, a place where Greek and Egyptian culture could mix. He designed wide streets, great temples, and a massive library that would one day hold knowledge from all over the world. Alexandria became a symbol of his dream, different people living together under one empire. While in Egypt, Alexander visited the famous Oracle of Siwa. This was a mysterious place where the gods were said to speak through priests. The oracle told him something that he never revealed to anyone. Some say it confirmed that he was truly a god's son, giving him even more confidence in his destiny. Others believe it warned him about his fate. Whatever was said, Alexander left Siwa believing he was chosen for greatness. Ruling such a massive empire was not easy, but Alexander had a unique way of governing. Instead of forcing everyone to adopt Greek ways, he respected local customs. He allowed people to keep their traditions, religions, and leaders as long as they remained loyal to him. This made many of his new subjects accept him as their ruler rather than fight against him. To unite his empire, Alexander merged Greek and Persian traditions. He dressed in Persian robes, followed their court customs, and even married Persian princesses. He also encouraged his men to marry Persian women, creating a mix of cultures. Some of his Greek soldiers did not like this, believing he was becoming too Persian. But Alexander believed that if Greek and Persian people could live as one, his empire would be stronger. However, not everyone was happy with his rule. Governing such a large empire meant facing rebellions. Some regions wanted their independence back, while some of his own men grew tired of endless conquests. There were plots against him, secret meetings, and even assassinations attempted. But Alexander was not one to let rebellion grow. When people rose against him, he acted swiftly, sometimes using diplomacy, other times using force. Despite challenges, Alexander managed to hold his empire together. His vision was not just to rule, but to create a world where different cultures could thrive under one government. He had built the first true global empire, something no one had ever done before. But even as he ruled over land stretching from Greece to India, his ambitions were not over. He still wanted more. Chapter 4. The Final Frontier. Alexander's Indian Campaign. Alexander the Great had conquered mighty Persia, but he was not satisfied. His eyes turned east, beyond the lands known to the Greeks, into the land of India, a place of mystery, great wealth, and legendary warriors. With his army, he marched forward, determined to push past the edge of the world itself. The journey into India was one of the most dangerous Alexander had ever faced. To reach it, he had to cross the towering peaks of the Hindu Kush mountains. His soldiers, already weary from years of battle, struggled through freezing winds and treacherous cliffs. Many perished along the way, but Alexander pressed on, convinced that his destiny lay beyond those snowy heights. Once they descended into the lush lands of India, a new challenge awaited them. A powerful king named Porus ruled these lands, and he was not about to surrender. When Alexander's army reached the banks of the Hydaspes River, they saw a terrifying sight. Porus stood ready with a massive army and something the Greeks had never faced before: war elephants. These towering beasts, armored and furious, trampled everything in their path. But Alexander was a master strategist. In the middle of a raging storm, he led a daring nighttime crossing of the river, surprising Porus and forcing him into battle. The fight was brutal. The elephants charged, crushing men underfoot, but Alexander and his cavalry darted between them, attacking from all sides. Finally, after hours of fierce combat, Porus surrendered. Instead of punishing him, Alexander was so impressed by his bravery that he made him an ally, allowing him to keep his kingdom under Macedonian rule. Despite this victory, Alexander's ambition pushed him even further east. He wanted to march to the very edge of the world. But his soldiers had reached their limit. They had fought for years, traveled thousands of miles, and faced unimaginable hardships. When they reached the Hyphasis River, they refused to go on. They begged their king to turn back. Alexander, furious and heartbroken, tried to convince them, but even he could not push them any further. At last, he gave in. They would return home, but the journey back was just as dangerous as the one they had taken to get there. Instead of choosing an easier route, Alexander led his army through the deadly Gedrosian desert, a scorching wasteland where water was scarce and the heat was unbearable. Many soldiers collapsed and died along the way. By the time they reached Babylon, Alexander had lost thousands of men. The campaign in India had taken its toll, but it had also changed him. He had seen new cultures, met powerful rulers, and realized that no single man, not even Alexander the Great, could conquer everything. Back in Babylon, Alexander was not the same man. The years of battle had made him paranoid. He started suspecting his closest friends of betrayal, executing them without mercy. When his best friend and general Hephaestion died suddenly, Alexander was devastated. He refused to eat or sleep, drowning in sorrow. His grief only made his health worse. Soon, the great conqueror himself fell ill. At just 32 years old, Alexander the Great died, leaving behind an empire that stretched from Greece to India. But his journey to the edge of the known world had changed history forever. His dream of uniting the world under one rule inspired countless future empires, and his name would be remembered for thousands of years to come. Chapter 5: The Mysterious Death of Alexander the Great. The shocking end of history's greatest conqueror. In the grand palace of Babylon, Alexander the Great celebrated with his men, drinking deep into the night. It was a time of victory. His empire stretched farther than anyone had ever imagined. But unknown to him, this would be his last feast. Just days later, the strongest man in the world would fall, leaving behind one of history's greatest mysteries. After the celebration, Alexander suddenly fell ill. At first, it seemed like nothing serious. He had fought in countless battles, survived terrible wounds, and marched through scorching deserts. But this time, something was different. His fever worsened, his body weakened, and soon he could no longer walk. Day after day, he grew worse, unable to speak, barely able to lift his head. His soldiers stood outside his palace, waiting to see their great leader one last time. When he could no longer rise from his bed, they were allowed to file past him. Some wept. Others touched his hands, hoping for a final blessing. Then, on June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, at just 32 years old, Alexander the Great took his last breath. His sudden death raised questions that have never been fully answered. Some believed he died of natural causes, struck down by malaria or typhoid. Others whispered of poison. Had his own generals betrayed him? He had become paranoid in his final years, executing close friends and officers. Did one of them take revenge, Or was it the Babylonians, the Persians, or even his own men, tired of endless war? The truth remains unknown. As soon as Alexander died, chaos erupted. His generals gathered around his bed, asking him who should rule his empire. His answer was simple but cryptic: to the strongest. But who was the strongest? None of his generals could agree. His empire, the largest the world had ever seen, had no clear heir. What followed was a brutal struggle known as the Wars of the Successors. His generals, men who had once fought side by side, now turned against each other. They divided his empire into pieces, claiming lands for themselves. His wife, his children, even his mother, none were safe from the bloody power struggle. Within a few years, nearly all of Alexander's family was dead, and his empire was shattered. The dream of one united world ruled under his name had died with him. Yet Alexander's legacy did not fade. Though his empire collapsed, his influence lived on. Greek culture spread across the lands he conquered, mixing with local traditions. New cities, many named after him, became centers of learning and trade. Great rulers like Julius Caesar and Napoleon looked to Alexander as their hero, hoping to follow in his footsteps. Even today, military leaders study his tactics. His boldness, his speed, and his ability to inspire loyalty changed the way wars were fought. But beyond the battlefield, his name became a symbol of greatness, of a man who dared to reach beyond the known world and left behind a legend that would never die. Chapter 6: The Man, the Myth, the Legend. Alexander the Great is one of the most famous figures in history, but who was he really? Was he a hero, a tyrant, or something more? The truth is complicated. He was both admired and feared by the people he ruled. Some saw him as a hero, while others thought of him as a ruthless conqueror. Over the years, his story has grown into a legend, but separating fact from myth is not easy. Many people consider Alexander a hero because of his big dreams and the amazing things he accomplished. He had a vision of a united world where different cultures and people could live together in peace. He wanted to create a global empire where everyone, no matter where they came from, could be part of one great kingdom. He believed in spreading Greek ideas of philosophy, science, and art to the farthest corners of the earth. In a way, his dream was to connect the world in a way no one had ever done before. That vision of unity is one of the reasons why many people still admire him today. But Alexander was not just a visionary. He was also a genius leader. His ability to inspire absolute loyalty in his soldiers is part of what made him so great. His army followed him through deserts, mountains, and battlefields without question. They believed in him, trusted him, and fought for him with everything they had. He led from the front, never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. This bond between him and his soldiers made him one of the most successful military leaders of all time. Even after his death, Alexander's influence continued to shape history. The cities he founded, like Alexandria, became centers of learning, culture, and trade. His empire spread Greek ideas and knowledge across a vast area, from Europe to Asia. Many cultures that were once separate came into contact with each other because of him. This had a lasting impact on the world, and his name is still remembered today for how he changed the course of history. However, Alexander was not without his flaws. Some people saw him as a tyrant rather than a hero. He was a brutal conqueror, and his army destroyed many cities. He ordered the deaths of thousands of people, including civilians who were caught in the way of his wars. In places like Tyre and Thebes, he showed no mercy, burning cities to the ground and killing anyone who resisted. His thirst for victory sometimes led him to make decisions that hurt innocent people. As Alexander gained more power, he became more ruthless. Some say he grew power-hungry and cruel as time went on. The more he conquered, the more he demanded from his soldiers and the people he ruled. He began to believe that no one could challenge his authority. His belief in his own greatness led to him making harsh decisions that alienated many of his closest friends and advisors. The betrayal and murders of his own companions are examples of how power can change a person. Alexander even had some of his closest generals killed, believing they might plot against him. The truth about Alexander is much more complicated than just hero or tyrant. He was a man with many sides, some admirable, some terrifying. He was not only a great warrior, but also a lover of philosophy, art, and science. He studied with the famous philosopher Aristotle and enjoyed learning about the world. He wanted to understand it better, not just conquer it. This shows that he was more than just a killer. He was a thinker and a dreamer. Over time, myths and stories about Alexander have shaped how we think about him. Some of these stories are true, and some have been exaggerated. For example, some legends claim that he was invincible, or that he was a god. The truth is that he was a man, and like all people, he had his strengths and weaknesses. What we do know is that his name has lasted for over 2,000 years. His leadership, his conquests, and his vision have inspired countless people throughout history. His legend lives on because of the incredible impact he had on the world. So, was Alexander the Great a hero, a tyrant, or something more? Maybe he was all of these things depending on how you look at him. What's clear is that he was one of the most influential leaders in history, and his story will continue to be told for generations to come.